SCP-7542 is no longer in the Foundation's possession. However, any information recovered that could be used to replicate an instance of SCP-7542, such as engineering logs, blueprints, and research notes, must be seized and stored in the archives. Access to anything other than general information is restricted without Level 4 security clearance. Photographs and documents containing only general information may be accessed with Level 2 clearance. Class B amnestics are to be given to any unauthorized individual found to be in possession of material related to SCP-7542. SCP-7542 was an experimental super soldier designed by the Valran Corporation in 1964. According to Group P intelligence, the intent behind SCP-7542's creation was to produce an elite soldier that could both inflict and withstand heavy damage, even in the face of technological or numerical superiority. The secondary objective was to produce an unquestionably loyal soldier, capable of obeying any order without question, and only answered to Valran. The identity of the subject used to create SCP-7542 remains unknown. Before augmentation, it was most likely a muscular, Caucasian male that was originally 1.82 meters in height. Valran records suggest the subject was originally a decorated member of Spetsnaz, possibly having served in World War II, but this remains unconfirmed. SCP-7542 was originally identified by the codename Ymir, after the mythological father of the giants. Based on the available information, SCP-7542 would have been approximately 2.13 meters tall, easily dwarfing most unmodified soldiers. This body was encased in heavy metal armor made of 2 layers of steel lined with Kevlar, as well as another unknown material. This effectively made SCP-7542 resistant to most conventional bullets. This armor was permanently sealed around the user and equipped with a self-contained air filtration system. A small port on the back of the neck permitted access to a feeding tube. Addendum: Operation Brick Wall. When the Tet Offensive began on January 31st, 1968, America was ready to deploy every military resource it had into repelling the North Vietnamese army. Soviet intelligence uncovered evidence of a transaction made between U.S. President Lyndon B. Johnson and the Valravn Corporation to deploy a then-unknown weapon into the city of Hue, which had been successfully occupied by the NVA. An undercover Group P operative embedded in Valravn discovered the weapon was a mechanically augmented super soldier nicknamed Ymir. Soon, pictures and videos of the soldier started to emerge. Reports of its devastating effects on the NVA reached Group P. The brass decided that this weapon was dangerous and needed to be destroyed. Termination orders were issued for Ymir and his creator. The strike team Red Storm was deployed to Hue with the goal of carrying out the termination orders. Task Force Red Storm consists of 4 people: Major Sergei Voronin, Lieutenant Valisy Kestrov, Sergeant Anya Moloknia, and Sergeant Dmitry Tchaikovsky. Major Voronin is a longtime veteran of Group P since World War II. He had previously been involved in multiple classified operations across the Soviet Union. Surviving Group P records indicate that he operated in Korea and in the early stages of the Vietnam War. Lieutenant Kestrov is a former naval officer recruited after surviving an encounter with an unknown anomaly. Sergeant Moloknia is a marksman who held some notoriety in the Red Storm, described by one of her peers as cold as ice, but she always has your back. Sergeant Tchaikovsky is a former military engineer with the skill for operating machinery. This reportedly gave him skills in working with radio equipment. The following interview logs come from audio recordings of the team's debriefings after the mission. These have been translated from their original Russian and arranged to present a picture of events. The full unedited recordings are available in the archive. The interviewer, Captain Boris Medved, asks Kestrov to tell him about his arrival in Vietnam. Kestrov responds, "There wasn't much at first. Our plane landed in Hanoi, and then we were put on a helicopter that brought us to Hue." Medved then asks Kestrov if that's when he began looking for Ymir, and Kestrov replies, "That's what they were there for, though I wasn't sure how we were going to find him in that mess. The whole city was in ruins. It seemed like you couldn't turn a quarter without something being on fire. No matter where we went, we could hear gunfire and explosions, occasional shelling." Medved then asks, when did he find Ymir? Keshav then replies, our first lead was the NVA distress call when Tchaikovsky just missed him. It gave us a strategy, he says. Voronin's orders to Tchaikovsky were to start listening for any similar distress calls. Did it work? Medved asks. Keshav replies, partially. We kept finding places Ymir had been. We could see the destruction he caused. One by one, we started to see the magnitude of his violence. It became increasingly clear why Group P wanted this thing terminated. Medved then asks him to tell him about the kill zone they set up. Keshav replies, Voronin had found a narrow residential street. It seemed abandoned. Looked like the Americans had already searched it. But luckily, most of the houses were intact enough for us to use. He had set up a 50 cal machine gun in one of the houses. We had it aimed through an open window. Tchaikovsky helped Voronin set up explosives. Then Moloknia radioed in to tell us about the tank. You had a plan for that? He's asked. Of course. Moloknia usually took up rooftop positions. When she made it back, Voronin gave her an RPG with several shells. We were as prepared as we could possibly be. Medved's curious about when the team engaged him. Keshav replies, I was on the 50 cal and I started firing. I swear I emptied an entire magazine into Ymir, and it seemed to do nothing. He just kept marching forward. With one arm raised, he began spraying every building on my side with bullets. I was lucky enough to duck just in time. Then I heard our explosives go off. When I looked out the window, I saw a cloud of smoke. I watched as Voronin stepped out of the house across from me. I saw it stumble out of the smoke, struggling to stay up on its feet. I couldn't believe it was still standing. It collapsed and fell to the ground, its minigun arm barely holding up. Voronin stood at the door, watching, waiting to see if it had died. Instead, it looked at him and lifted up his other arm. I hadn't seen what was attached. It had been a grenade launcher, but I guess they replaced it with a flamethrower, except it wasn't a normal flamethrower. This had a way of sticking to Voronin. Medved says, sounds like napalm. The Americans used to put it in flamethrowers during World War II. Keshav says, I thought they usually put that stuff in bombs. They do, but it sounds like they might have revisited the flamethrower concept in Ymir's case, Medved says. Keshav replies, it also managed to ignite the building, and the fire was starting to spread. I knew I couldn't face Ymir with an empty 50 cal, and I was afraid he was going to turn it on me, so I ran. I managed to get back to the back door just as the house went up in flames. Then the ones next to it. Next thing I know, the whole city was burning. I just had to find the others. Medved asks what happens to Voronin, and Keshav says, I found him in the rubble, covered in burns. I could barely recognize him. He struggled to speak, and I can tell he was in pain. With the little strength he had, he handed me his pistol and told me I was in command now. What did you say? Medved says. Keshav says, I told him I couldn't, that I wasn't ready for this, but he insisted I was and made me promise one thing, that I would kill Ymir. Then he gave me one final order, to shoot him. I aimed my gun at him, my hands trembled, and pulled the trigger. Medved then asks him how exactly he planned to take on Ymir. Keshav replies, we'd already seen that bullets wouldn't work on him, but the explosive seems to have an effect. They were enough to weaken him, at least temporarily. So that was our best option. But I was starting to suspect we'd need more than what we had left from the last attempt. If we wanted to stand a chance, we needed to hit him with everything we could. This meant we needed maximum firepower. Medved then says, and how did you plan to achieve that? Keshav says, I tried calling in an additional ordnance. We managed to get a few more crates of C4 and RPG shells, but I had to be sure we were ready. Luckily, we were in Vietnam. Keshav says, we were in the middle of a war zone. The fighting was going on around us. We were constantly hearing the sounds of gunfire and shelling. It wasn't hard to find places where heavy fighting had taken place. Keshav then sets up an intricate trap for Ymir, and when the firing was over, Ymir still stepped out of the smoke. He was about to run when he noticed both its weapons were destroyed by the explosion. It stumbled, barely able to keep its footing, and it looked at him. After stepping out the smoke, it made eye contact with Keshav. For the first time, it can barely see through the fogged lenses. A pair of human eyes stared back at him, but they didn't seem to be staring at him with any malevolence or hatred. They looked like they were in pain. In that moment, all the rage and all the anger Keshrov had felt had dissipated. He only felt pity. He then realized it was just a victim. He was once a man, until someone turned him into an abomination. Then the unexpected happened. It spoke. It was difficult to make out, but he started trying to tell him something in broken Russian. He said no more. Medved then asked, what did he mean by that? Keshrov says, I think he knew while we were there. He was done. He wanted it to end. I think he wanted me to kill him more than I did. And I think he wanted me to prevent anything like him from ever being created again. You're saying he wanted to die? Medved asks. Don't you get it? He was once a man, twisted and turned into a weapon, with no will of his own. All he wanted to do was go down like a soldier, standing and fighting. Ymir then requests for Keshrov to kill his creator, Curtis, and tells Keshrov to go behind him and shoot him where a small tube connects for feeding. After hearing the name Curtis, Medved goes out the room and requests a file. Shortly after, the file is brought to him, and a man named Dr. Joseph Curtis is identified, a disgraced American scientist who has rumors of him entering a contract with Valran Corporation for an unknown purpose. Group P then tracks Curtis to a secret lab hidden in a warehouse in West Berlin. Red Storm was deployed with orders to terminate Curtis and destroy all records of Project Jotun. The final conversation between Curtis and Keshrov is a conversation of morals and a conversation of pawns. Curtis truly thought he was doing something right, but Keshrov saw the atrocities he had created. In the end, it's Moloknia who kills Curtis and not Keshrov, due to Keshrov wanting to torture him, but Moloknia puts him out of his misery. Shortly before his termination, Dr. Curtis attempted to write a letter to the Global Occult Coalition. It says, "It is unfortunate that I have to write to you now, but I see no other choice. You are the only one I can trust to carry out my request. I have made a huge mistake. I tried to do something good, but it's been wrapped into something monstrous. It is for this reason that I must ask you to destroy my work. This must be stopped before any more harm is done. During my time in Korea, I saw many men die horribly, but I also saw too many problems with those who survived. Men who went in healthy came out with missing legs, hearing loss, and nerve damage. Some couldn't even walk, or their brains were too damaged to function. I saw their bodies as broken and started trying to find ways to fix them, but nobody listened. No American company wanted to fund my research. Rich men who'd never seen combat told me it wasn't profitable. Valerian came to me in 1955. They were the first ones to see value in my work. They told me I could help their wounded soldiers and my treatments could be marketed. Of course I accepted, but something changed. Valerian had some strange practices, some sort of rune-based technology. It's almost like magic, but they also have some fanatical beliefs, and somehow they got into my head. Suddenly, I thought I couldn't just fix broken bodies but improve them. When they brought me Specimen 42, I thought I was saving his life. I didn't know who he was, but he was scared. He lost both his arms and at the elbow and was burnt all over. Struggling to even breathe, he begged me to help him, but all I did was make him their slave. Do not trust Valerian. Do not trust their promises. They can only use you. They will get into your mind and destroy you from the inside out. Project Jotun is completely. They will kill thousands more. You must destroy every trace of it. I have attached a map with the lab's location. Thank you, Joseph Curtis." President Lyndon B. Johnson, with assistance from the SCP Foundation, began working to discredit any reports of his deal with Valravn. Witnesses were pressed into signing NDAs while photographic and video evidence was seized. The loss of Ymir, along with its creator and all information regarding its construction, resulted in crippling losses for Valravn in the following years. However, the company would begin to rebuild through investments in computer technology during the 1970s. This led to Valravn studying military applications for computers and eventually trying to integrate their components with the human body. This ultimately laid the groundwork for the cybernetic soldiers they employ today. Officially, Ymir's body was destroyed per Kestrov's request. However, in secret, Captain Medved had an autopsy conducted on Ymir. In 2015, operatives of the SCP Foundation tracked a cell of the Chaos Insurgency to an abandoned Group E black site in Belarus. In the ensuing raid, the MTF entered a laboratory containing the remains of human test subjects. No official records of these experiments existed, but reports found on site indicated that it was being used as a part of a Group P effort to produce a human weapon. A sealed coffin containing the heavily disfigured remains of human cadaver was recovered. Records found on site indicated a Group P-backed effort to replicate the experiments that produced Ymir. The project had been authorized by Captain Boris Medved. The body was transported to SCP Site-19 for further analysis. A year later, the Foundation was sent the following message. Dr. Redacted, it has come to our attention that you have recently acquired something of great interest to us. You have labeled it as SCP-7542, but we have known it as Ymir. I believe that Valravn could put SCP-7542 to great use, but I understand that you will not give him to us for free. Fortunately, we have something that we believe will be even greater value to your organization. I would like to propose a meeting to discuss the terms of a mutually beneficial transaction. The meeting then took place 3 weeks later, when Dr. Brandt met with the O5 Council. Ultimately, the trade was accepted, and SCP-7542 was released in exchange for Redacted.